The map disappeared from Jeremiah Dalton's coat pocket somewhere between the harbor master's office and the Steaming Kettle Tavern, and he knew exactly who had taken it. He had seen her fingers move, fast and light as a sparrow's wing, grazing his coat when she shouldered past him on the crowded dock, green skin, catching the afternoon sun like polished jade, dark hair braided thick down her back, amber eyes cutting sideways at him for just a fraction of a heartbeat before she was gone into the press of sailors and stevedores and fish merchants. He had thought nothing of the brush at first. Harbor towns were tight with bodies, and Caldermore was tighter than most, wedged into the narrow strip of flat ground between the volcanic ridge and the Blacksand shore, its docks always swarming with traffic from the inland hot spring settlements that needed salted fish and iron fittings and good pine lumber. Then he reached for the map to verify the route he had memorized only imperfectly, and his hand found nothing but linen lining. He spun on his heel and looked back down the dock. The crowd had already swallowed her. Jeremiah was not a man prone to cursing, but he said something then that made the nearest dockhand look up from his rope with raised brows. The map was everything. 3 weeks of careful surveying, marked in his own hand on oil-treated parchment, every depth sounding and sandbar and hidden rock along the channel mouth between Caldermore and the hot spring harbor of Ashenpool. The harbor master of Ashenpool had hired him specifically because no reliable chart of that approach existed, and the volcanic bottom shifted every season. Without it, Jeremiah could not complete the contract, could not get paid, could not pay back the lumber merchant in Caldermore who had fronted him materials for the small commission boat he'd built to make the survey run in the first place. He was 31 years old, a shipwright by training and a dockhand by necessity in the lean years between commissions, and he had worked himself down to the bone to afford the instruments and time that survey had cost. That map was 18 months of ambition folded into a piece of treated parchment no larger than a man's 2 hands laid flat. He went after her. The crowd on the main dock thinned once he pushed past the fish stalls and the rope walkers, and he caught a glimpse of dark braid moving up the steep cobbled lane that climbed from the harbor into the older quarter of Caldermore, where the buildings leaned on each other like tired men, and the smells of sulfur from the ridge mixed badly with the smells of tallow candles and old grease. He followed at a run, threading between a porter with a loaded yoke and a pair of arguing merchants, and came out onto the wider street that ran along the base of the ridge just in time to see her turn into a side alley. He followed. The alley was quiet and narrow, and she was standing at the far end of it with her back against the rough stone wall and her arms folded, as though she had been waiting for him, as though she had known he would come. She was smiling, and it was the most infuriating and also the most magnificent smile he had seen in his life. Up close she was something that stopped the breath. She stood at least 4 inches taller than him, and Jeremiah was not a short man. Her shoulders were broad and powerful beneath a fitted travel vest of dark tawny leather, laced tight from waist to collar over a deep poker linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. The vest was shaped close to her torso and nipped at her waist with a wide buckled belt that held a short curved blade and a pair of leather pouches. Her leggings were the same dark tawny leather, fitted smooth along strong legs, tucked into knee-high boots with iron buckles. Her tusks were modest by Orc standards, 2 elegant curves of ivory rising from her lower lip, just enough to give her speech a faintly musical softness when she talked. Her amber eyes had a ring of deeper gold around the iris that caught the thin light in the alley and made them glow. He had seen Orc women before. Caldermore got all kinds. But he had never seen this one, and something in the back of his mind said that was wrong, that there was a familiarity he could not quite locate. "You are fast," she said, as if complimenting a horse. "Give it back," he said. She reached into the inside pocket of her vest and produced the folded square of oiled parchment, holding it up between 2 fingers, arm extended, completely out of his reach. She was still smiling. "I will," she said pleasantly, "when you catch me." Then she turned and ran. He was 3 full seconds behind her purely out of astonishment, and she used every one of them to build a lead. She went up the wall at the end of the alley, actually went up it, finding purchase in the crumbling mortar gaps with fingertips and boot toes, and was over the top and gone before Jeremiah reached the wall himself. He went around. He knew Caldermore's back streets the way he knew the grain of good timber, and he cut wide through the Tanner's Row and doubled back toward the ridge path where the only real exit from that quarter led, betting she had not been in town long enough to know the short cut. He came out onto the ridge path 30 feet ahead of her. She pulled up short, actually laughing now, and the sound of it hit him somewhere under his ribs. He put out his hand. "The map," he said, somewhat breathlessly. She looked at him for a long moment, head tilted, assessing him the way he might assess a timber beam for hidden cracks. Then she reached into her vest and held the map out, and when he took it her fingers did not release it immediately. Their hands were together on the folded parchment for one held breath. "You surprised me," she said quietly. The laughter had gone, but something warm had replaced it in her eyes. "I did not think you knew the alleys." "I built half the bollards on the lower dock," he said. "I know every stone in this town." She let go of the map. He held it but found he was not looking at it. "Why did you take it?" he said. The warmth in her eyes shifted to something more complex, cautious. "I needed to know what it showed," she said. "I needed to see whether your survey matched what I know of the Ashenpool Channel." He stared at her. "You know the Ashenpool Channel. I grew up 2 leagues above it," she said. "In the valley." And then it landed. The memory clicked into place. 6 years ago, on his first attempt at the Ashenpool survey, before he had the instruments or the experience to do it properly. He had been 25, reckless, and his flat-bottomed skiff had caught a hidden rock in fog and nearly swamped. An orc girl from the valley settlement had waded in from the shore to help him drag the skiff clear, water up to her collarbone, laughing at his frantic bailing. She had been 17 then, or close to it, and she had helped him recaulk the seam with pine pitch from her own pack before he limped back to Caldermore. He had never learned her name. He had thought about her occasionally in the 6 years since, not quite able to say why. "The skiff," he said aloud. Her eyes changed completely. The assessment was gone and something unguarded replaced it, real and startled. "You remember," she said. "You caulked my boat with your own pitch and wouldn't take payment," he said. "I thought about that for years. I always meant to come back and find you." She looked at him for a long time. The ridge wind moved between them, carrying sulfur and sea salt, and somewhere down the lane a donkey was arguing with its handler. "My name is Dura Gorhorn," she said. "Jeremiah Dalton." She nodded slowly. "I know your name," she said. "It is on the survey contract. I have been watching the harbor office for 3 days waiting for you to arrive." He was quiet for a moment, taking that in. "Why?" Her expression tightened. Not with hostility, but with the look of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and is deciding whether to set it down. "Because I need that survey," she said, "and because I need the man who made it to come with me to Ashenpool before someone else gets there first. There are people who want that channel chart for reasons that have nothing to do with navigation." Jeremiah looked down at the folded map in his hand. Then he looked back at her. Then, against every reasonable instinct he possessed, he asked what she meant. She told him, standing there on the ridge path with the volcanic rock at their backs and the harbor sprawling below them. And what she told him was enough to make him understand that the map in his hand was a great deal more dangerous than a piece of surveying parchment had any right to be. The hot spring valley of Ashenpool sat in a volcanic cleft 2 days' hard travel inland, and it was neither fully human nor fully orc territory. It never had been. The Treaty of Ashrock, signed 40 years ago by the elder council of the Gorhorn clan and the border governor of the Caldermore Reach, had designated the valley neutral ground, open for settlement and trade to both peoples, governed by a joint commission that met twice yearly and mostly managed not to kill each other over the steaming mineral pools that locals bottled and sold throughout the lowlands. The hot spring water had genuine medicinal properties, and the valley produced more of it than anywhere else in the Reach. It was worth a great deal of money. The current border governor of Caldermore, a man named Harwick Stren, wanted to reroute the Ashenpool harbor access. He claimed the channel was too narrow for proper commercial traffic, and that a new cut would benefit everyone. What he actually wanted, according to Dura, was to establish a customs point at the only viable entry to the valley by water, which would give him effective control over all trade in and out of Ashenpool, and would make the Treaty of Ashrock's Joint Commission essentially irrelevant. The new harbor master at Ashenpool, a Stren appointment, had already begun laying groundwork for that customs station. All that was missing was a reliable chart showing exactly where to cut. The survey Jeremiah had made was that chart. There are 2 other copies, he said. One in the harbor master's file in Caldermore, Dura said, and one was being carried by a courier headed for Ashenpool last week. The courier never arrived. I believe Stren's people intercepted it. She paused. That is why I needed to see yours. To know if your survey confirms what I know, that the channel cannot be cut where Stren wants it cut without destroying the thermal vents that feed the valley's eastern pools. If those vents are disrupted, the pools fail. The hot spring settlements in the eastern valley, which are entirely Orc settlements, go with them. Jeremiah was quiet for a moment. The harbor wind came up the ridge and moved through his coat. So this is not just about a customs station, he said. It never was, Dura said. He looked down at the map again. His careful soundings, his carefully marked depths, the little notation he had made in the lower margin about the thermal irregularities he had noticed around the eastern shallows. He had noted them only as navigational hazards. He had not understood what they were. He looked up at her. "What do you need from me?" She held his gaze steady. "I need you to come to Ashenpool with me and testify before the Joint Commission that the cut cannot be made safely. Your survey proves it. Your word as the man who made it carries weight that mine does not." She said it without bitterness, but with a clean, precise understanding of reality. An Orc woman's word in a border town commission hall had a known value, and it was not the same as a human shipwright's. He thought about the lumber merchant and the debt. He thought about the Ashenpool harbormaster's contract, which technically required him to deliver the survey in person anyway. He thought about what it meant to know that his work had stakes he had not imagined when he was pulling it together in a borrowed skiff on cold gray water. He thought about her standing waist-deep in the same channel 6 years ago, laughing while she saved his boat. "All right," he said. Duragorhorn studied him for one more long second. Then she nodded, and the thing that settled over her face was not relief exactly, but something quieter and deeper than relief. Something that looked like she had gambled on the right hand. "We leave at first light," she said. "I have horses. I need to file my arrival at the harbor office tonight," he said. "And there is someone at the steaming kettle I owe a drink to." A trace of the alley smile came back. "1 drink," she said. "We have a long road." They ate together that evening at the steaming kettle, which was the kind of establishment that tolerated all varieties of custom as long as payment was prompt and arguments stayed under a certain volume. The barkeep, a wide woman named Ossel who had been feeding dock workers and travelers for 20 years, brought them fish stew and black bread without comment, though Jeremiah caught her looking once at Dura with the particular measuring expression that Caldermore's older residents used when they were calculating whether trouble was about to begin. It was not hostile, exactly. Just careful. Dura did not appear to notice, or if she noticed, did not care. She ate with the focused efficiency of someone accustomed to eating when food was available rather than when it was convenient. And between spoonfuls, she described the valley road, and the passes, and the 2 places where Stren's men had been reported checking travelers in the past month. She had a voice that was low and unhurried, and carried a resonance that Jeremiah found himself listening to not just for information, but for the texture of it. He caught himself doing this twice and made himself stop and focus on the actual content, which was important and needed to be in his head before morning. "You have been watching this situation for a long time," he said at one point. "Since my mother's settlement was served notice 2 years ago," she said. Stren's first effort was to reclassify the Eastern Valley as unceded border land rather than treaty-neutral ground. The commission rejected it. Then he tried to have the Gorehorn Clan Council declared non-signatory to the original treaty on a technical genealogical argument. The commission rejected that too. She picked up her bread with a steady hand. This is his third effort, the customs station. It is the most dangerous because it does not look like what it is. "It looks like commerce," Jeremiah said. "It looks like progress," she said, and there was a dry weight to the word. Humans are very good at things that look like progress. He did not disagree. He had watched Caldermore expand along the ridge for the past decade, watched the new merchant houses go up and the old orc trading posts come down, watched the quiet reshaping of the harbor district that left less and less space for the seasonal orc fishing camps that had worked those waters for generations. He had not done anything about any of it. He had kept his head down and built his boats. "I should have come back," he said. He meant to the channel. He meant to find her. The sentence covered both. She looked at him over her bowl with those gold-ringed amber eyes. "You are here now," she said, and her voice was not accusatory. It was simply true. They left Caldermore in the gray hour before the sun came over the volcanic ridge, Dur on a strong bay mare and Jeremiah on a compact roan gelding she had sourced from a stable he had never found despite knowing the town well. The road north was good for the first few hours, broad and traded flat between logging camps and small farmsteads where smoke was beginning to rise from morning fires. Children watched from fence lines. A farmer's dog pursued them for half a league with great dedication before losing interest. The road climbed as the morning went on, and the character of the land changed. The sulfur smell that was a background note in Caldermore grew stronger and more particular as the road entered the volcanic uplands, the soil darkening from the brown loam of the coast to the gray-black mineral earth of the ridge, where sparse pine and twisted juniper grew wide apart in ground that steamed in the morning cold. The hot spring seeps began to appear along the roadside, small clear pools edged with rust and orange mineral bloom, sometimes sending up a thin column of vapor that drifted across the road like purposeful mist. Dura rode the road the way she had moved through the alley, with an easy competence that made it look like she had been designed specifically for whatever terrain she happened to be crossing. She talked when there was something worth saying and was quiet without discomfort when there was not, and Jeremiah found himself revising upward, continuously, his estimate of what kind of person she was. He had met people who were competent. He had met people who were principled. People who were both were rarer, and people who were both and also good company on a hard road were the rarest thing he knew of. By midday they had climbed enough that the sea was a distant gleam behind and below them, and the first real views of the volcanic valley opened on the right side of the road. A wide, steam-hazed cleft between two ridges, the slopes terraced with mineral formations in shades of white and rust and sulphurous yellow, the valley floor a patchwork of green settlement gardens and blue-white pool surface, and the darker lines of roads and settlement paths. It was genuinely beautiful and genuinely strange, the kind of landscape that seemed too theatrical to be real. "There," Dura said, reining the bay mare to a halt. On the far slope of the valley, just visible through the steam haze, was a cluster of orc-built structures, longer, lower buildings with thick earthen walls and heavy timber roofs, surrounded by cooking gardens and corrals. The Eastern Settlement, her mother's people. "They are still there," Jeremiah said. "Still there," she confirmed. "For now." She touched her heels to the mare and moved on. They did not discuss what it would mean if they failed. Neither of them needed to. The trouble found them on the third pass of the road, a switchback section where the track narrowed between a raw rock face and a steep drop into a thermal gully, and there were two men on horseback blocking the way. Well-dressed men, not road bandits, with Stren's customs house badge on their coats, a tin circle with a crossed key and anchor. They were also carrying short swords at their hips and the kind of expressions that came from a license to inconvenience people with official impunity. "Road check," said the larger of the two. His eyes went to Jeremiah's saddlebags with professional attention. "Documents and cargo declaration." "I am a contracted surveyor with business at the Ashenpool Harbor Commission," Jeremiah said, keeping his voice easy. "My contract papers are in order. Let me see them." Jeremiah produced them. The man studied them with the slow care of someone who wanted the process to feel unpleasant. His partner was looking at Dura with a different quality of attention entirely, assessing and dismissive at once. "The orc," he said. "She is not on your contract." "She is my guide," Jeremiah said. "Guides do not require harbormaster contracts. What is her business in Ashenpool?" "Her business," Dura said, "is her own." The man's eyes moved to her and sharpened. "You have a mouth on you," he said. "Let me see your papers." "I carry treaty documentation as a Gorehorn clan member," Dura said. She did not raise her voice. She produced a folded document from inside her vest, the leather cover stamped with the treaty seal, and held it out. The man took it and looked at it with the same slow, performed incomprehension. "This is a 40-year-old document," he said. "Treaties do not expire," she said. He handed it back. "Roads do require current travel permits," he said. "Harbormaster Stren has authorized new travel documentation requirements for all non-citizen transit of the approach road, as of last month." "I have not heard of any such requirement," Jeremiah said. "It is new," the man said pleasantly. "The orc will need to be held here while we verify her status. She can travel on to Ashenpool when the paperwork is processed. That takes 3 to 5 days. The valley was 2 hours away. The commission meeting was the following morning. 3 to 5 days meant missing it entirely." Jeremiah looked at the man. He looked at the badge. He looked at the drop into the thermal gully and the rock face and the narrow road, and then he looked at Dura, who was watching him with the particular stillness of someone who had experienced this exact variety of official obstacle many times before and had learned to swallow her response to it. He made a decision. "No," he said. The man blinked. "I beg your pardon. She is traveling under treaty documentation, and she is with me under a valid commission contract, which supersedes road check authority under the Caldermore Reach Commercial Code, Section 14. Jeremiah said. He was not entirely certain Section 14 said exactly that, but he had spent enough time in Caldermore's harbor offices to know that the commercial code was large and complicated, and that people with authority generally did not admit to uncertainty about what it contained. "If you want to escalate this, I would recommend doing it at the Commission Hall in Ashenpool tomorrow morning, where I will be testifying under contract, and your harbor master Stren will be in attendance." The larger man stared at him. His partner looked uncertain. There was a long moment in which the road was very quiet except for the distant bubbling of the thermal gully and the horse's shifting weight. Then the large man pulled his horse aside, not graciously but definitively. He looked at Jeremiah with the expression of a man storing a debt. "Ride on," he said. Jeremiah did not hurry. He rode past at the same steady pace, and Dura came alongside him, and neither of them looked back until the switchback turned and the two men were out of sight. Then Dura released a long, slow breath. "Section 14, she said. "I have no idea," he said. She looked at him, and for the first time since the alley she laughed the way she had in the alley, fully and without calculation, and it was better than it had been the first time, because this time he was beside her and could feel the warmth of it. "That was either very clever or very foolish," she said. "On a road with a drop into a thermal gully and 2 armed men, there is not much difference," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Most people would not have done that," she said. "Most people would have let me wait." He looked over at her, at the strong line of her profile against the steam-hazed valley. "I am not most people," he said simply. She looked back at him, and what moved across her face was something open and real and a little surprised, as though she had been waiting for the catch in the offer and had not found it. They made camp that night at a traveler's rest on the ridge. a stone shelter with a fire pit, and a water barrel that sat at the last good vantage before the road descended into the valley proper. The sky above the volcanic ridge was extraordinary, the way skies only got in high places far from the harbor haze, thick with stars and sheened with the occasional pale glow of a vent releasing gas far down the slope. They built a small fire and ate from Dura's provisions, dried venison and hard journey bread, and something she produced from one of her pouches that turned out to be a compressed cake of dried fruit and oat, which was better than it looked. She sat across the fire from him with her long legs drawn up and her arms resting on her knees, and in the firelight the green of her skin had warm bronze undertones, and her amber eyes caught the flame and gave it back doubled. She had undone the braid and was reworking it with the practiced ease of long habit, fingers moving through the dark fall of her hair while she talked, and Jeremiah had to remind himself more than once to listen to what she was saying rather than simply watching her hands. She talked about the Eastern settlement. Her mother, who had led it for 20 years and had been one of the original witnesses to the Treaty of Ashrock as a young woman. The pools that her people had managed for 3 generations, maintaining the mineral channels, keeping the sediment from blocking the vents, doing the seasonal work that kept the most valuable assets of the whole valley producing. The buyers from across the reach who came twice yearly to purchase the bottled mineral water, who dealt politely with her mother's people, and then in the same trip dealt with Stren's customs office to have the product reclassified under human commercial tax codes that took a percentage of every bottle. They do not come to steal, she said. They just arrange things so that slowly, gradually, what belongs to you becomes something you merely manage. And you look up one day and you are a laborer in your own inheritance. Jeremiah was quiet. He was thinking about the harbor district in Caldermore again. He was thinking about the old Orc trading post that was now a custom storage yard. "I am sorry," he said, "for all of it." She finished the braid and looked at him. "You did not do it," she said. "I did not stop it either." "You are one man," she said. "A shipwright," but she said it without dismissal. She said it the way someone weighs a true thing. "Tomorrow I will be a shipwright who testifies in front of a joint commission," he said. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow you will be that." A small silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. The fire crackled. Somewhere on the slope below, a night bird was making its case. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. The alley, you could have just sent me a letter. You had been watching the harbor office for 3 days. You had time to think of something official and straightforward." He paused. "Why the game with the map?" She looked at the fire for a moment. When she looked back at him, the expression was wry and a little rueful. "I needed to know what kind of man you were," she said. 6 years ago you were 25 and reckless, and you refused to leave a sinking skiff without trying to fix it yourself. But 6 years changes people. I needed to know if you were still the kind of man who chased what he cared about. "So you stole from me to find out if I would chase you," he said. She did not look away. "Yes," she said. He held her gaze. The fire moved between them. And he said, "You surprised me," she said. For the second time she used exactly those words, and they landed with more weight the second time. "You came over that wall and beat me to the ridge path." "You let me catch you," he said. "A little," she admitted. He smiled at that. She smiled back, and the tusks caught the firelight, and she looked magnificent and unconcerned with anything, and the thing that had been building in him since the alley tightened another degree. "Get some sleep," she said, and looked back at the fire. "The commission hall opens at first bell." He lay down in his bedroll and looked at the stars and thought about 6 years of mischances and the particular mercy of second ones. They were in the Ashenpool Valley by mid-morning, the road descending through layers of steam and mineral-scented warmth, until it opened onto the flat valley floor where the settlement paths crossed, and the pool keepers moved with their long-handled tools, and the air was 20 degrees warmer than the ridge. The town of Ashenpool itself was a genuine town, not large but solid, with stone buildings and a proper market square, and a commission hall that occupied the center of the square with an authority the building had clearly been designed to project. The Joint Commission met in a long room with a table of dark stone and chairs for 12, 6 from the human settlement and 6 from the orc community, and a raised chair at the head for the commission chair, who was a neutral party, a retired border magistrate named Tellys Warren, who was 60 years old and had the precise, weathered quality of a tool that had been used correctly for a long time. Harwick Stren was already there. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with the well-kept look of someone who spent merchant money on his appearance and called it authority. He had 2 aides and his new harbor master with him, and he did not look surprised to see Dura, which meant he had people on the road who had sent word ahead. He looked at Jeremiah with a quick professional assessment, and then looked at Dura with an expression that was carefully, deliberately neutral in the practiced way that hid contempt. "Commissioner Warren," Dura said, addressing the chair, "I have asked Jeremiah Dalton, licensed surveyor and shipwright of Caldermore Harbor, to present his survey of the Ashenpool Channel approach, which includes findings directly relevant to the proposed customs station and channel cut." Warren nodded. "Present." Jeremiah spread the map on the stone table. He had done this kind of thing before, explained technical findings to people who needed to understand them, and he was good at it in the particular way that people who work with their hands are good at clear explanation. He knew what things actually were because he had touched them and measured them, and that knowledge translated into a directness that complicated men in rooms sometimes lacked. He showed them the depth soundings. He showed them the thermal irregularity marks at the eastern shallows. He explained, with the map as reference, exactly where the proposed cut would have to be made, and exactly what that cut would intersect. "These notations here," he said, pointing to his marginalia, "I marked as navigational hazards when I surveyed them. I did not know what they were beyond that. Dura Gorhorn, who has managed the eastern pools for years and has detailed knowledge of the valley's thermal system, identified them when she reviewed my survey. They are the primary feed vents for the eastern pool complex." Stren's aide leaned forward. "The surveyor's expertise is navigational, not geological. His interpretation of thermal features is outside his competence." "I am not interpreting the features," Jeremiah said pleasantly. "I am telling you what I found. The map shows where they are. Their nature is a question for people with relevant knowledge, and I understand that the Commission has a geological assessment from the valley's own thermal managers, who have maintained these systems for 3 generations. Dura produced that assessment. It was thorough. It had been prepared over the previous 6 months by a consortium of the orc pool keepers and a human thermal engineer who had been brought in from the northern hot springs settlements. It was the kind of document that had clearly cost a great deal of time and effort, and was very difficult to dismiss without looking dishonest rather than merely wrong. Stren looked at it with the expression of a man watching a door close. The debate went on for most of the morning, and it was not always pleasant. Stren's harbor master challenged the survey methodology. Stren himself questioned the treaty documentation that Dura had been relying on for her standing before the Commission, making the same technical genealogical argument that had already failed before. Warren shut it down with the same patience and firmness that characterized everything he did. Stren's aide made an argument about commercial necessity that one of the Human Commission members, a leather merchant who actually lived in Ashenpool and understood what the eastern pools produced for local trade, dismantled line by line. But what settled it ultimately was the map, because the map was irrefutable. Jeremiah had made it with good instruments and professional care, and it showed exactly what it showed, and no amount of repositioning the argument changed what was on the parchment. The channel cut proposed by Stren went directly through the thermal vent array that fed the eastern pools. That was a fact. Stren could contest the interpretation of what that meant, but he could not contest the geography. Commissioner Warren called the vote after midday. The proposed channel cut and customs station were rejected. The treaty provisions for the Ashenpool approach remained intact. The commission directed the harbor master to file Jeremiah's survey as the official chart of record for the approach, which meant any future proposals would have to work from the same baseline. It was not everything. Stren would try again, through some other mechanism, and everyone in the room knew it. But this particular door was closed. Outside in the square, in the warm mineral air and the thin white steam that drifted from the nearby pools, Dura stood for a moment and looked up at the ridge line. Her face was very still and very open, the way a face sometimes is in the moment after something long feared has not happened. Jeremiah stood beside her. He did not say anything immediately because the moment did not seem to need it. Then she looked at him, and the smile that came was different from the alley smile and different from the firelight smile. It was full and real and had nothing calculated in it. "Thank you," she said. "It was the map's work," he said. "I just carried it." "You carried it," she said, "past two of Stren's men on a narrow road." "Section 14, he said. She laughed, and this time it was the kind of laugh that lands in the chest and stays there. The square was beginning to fill with midday traffic, pool keepers bringing bottled mineral water to the market stalls, a blacksmith moving through with a laden cart, a group of children from the valley school cutting diagonally from one side to the other on whatever mission children pursued with that degree of conviction. Ordinary life proceeding. Jeremiah watched it and thought that this was the thing worth protecting. Not the map, not the treaty language, not the commission vote, but this. The daily ordinariness of people living where they had always lived. "I should go to the Eastern Settlement," Dura said. "My mother will want to know the outcome." "Of course," he said. He should have said something about the return road and the harbor master's payment and the business of delivering the survey, all of which remained to be done. He should have said something practical and moved toward the next task. Instead he said, "Can I come with you?" She looked at him steadily. "To the settlement." "Only if I am welcome," he said. "I would like to meet the woman who raised you." The look she gave him was long and measuring and warm. You would be the first human man she had not actively chased off her property in several years, she said. "I will take those odds," he said. Her hand was near his on the fence rail of the square's water trough. She moved it the small distance required and covered his hand with hers, and her grip was firm and warm and deliberate. The way everything she did was deliberate. "Then come," she said. The road to the Eastern Settlement ran along the valley wall, rising gently through terraced mineral gardens, and past the first of the managed pools, wide shallow blue-white circles edged with the orange and rust mineral formations that gave the valley its particular palette. The air was warmest here, thick with steam and mineral smell that was not unpleasant once the nose adjusted, something clean and ancient in it like the smell of stone that has been wet for a very long time. The settlement buildings were better up close than they had looked from the ridge. Thick walls of earth and stone construction with heavy timber roofs, each building set at an angle to catch maximum morning warmth from the volcanic ground itself. The yards between them laid with flat stone paths and edged with the managed garden rows that made the difference between sufficient food and not. A dozen or so people were visible at various tasks. An older man repairing a fence, two women working a water channel with long-handled implements, a pair of young men shifting a load of timber. They all looked up when Dura and Jeremiah came through the settlement gate, and the looking was the particular focused attention of a community that had learned to assess strangers quickly and accurately. It was not hostile. It was simply alert. Dura's mother was in the yard behind the main building, and she was exactly the kind of woman Jeremiah had expected from everything her daughter had told him, 60 years old, broad-shouldered, with gray in the thick braid over her shoulder, and eyes the same amber gold as Dura's, but with more patience in them and a great deal more history. Her name was Marek Gorhorn, and she looked at Jeremiah the way she might have looked at an unusual weather pattern, interested, cautious, not yet committed to any interpretation. "The commission voted," she said to Dura, ignoring Jeremiah for the moment. "The station is rejected," Dura said. "The channel cut is off the table." Marek was quiet for a moment. Then she pressed her hand flat against her daughter's shoulder in a gesture that was clearly specific to them, intimate and old. "Good," she said. Just that. Then she looked at Jeremiah. "And this is the human with the survey." "This is Jeremiah Dalton," Dura said. "The one from the skiff." Something shifted in Marak's expression. She looked at him with a new layer of attention. "The one you caulked the boat for," she said. "She saved that skiff," Jeremiah said, "and she would not take payment. I thought about that for a long time." Marak studied him for another moment. Then she said, "There is food inside." It was not exactly a warm welcome, but it was a real one, and in context it was generous. Jeremiah understood that and accepted it correctly, without making too much of it, which seemed to register favorably with Marak in the way that quiet understanding of the terms of hospitality usually did. They ate at a long table with 6 members of the settlement, and the conversation was careful at first, and then, gradually, less so. Jeremiah answered questions about the survey methodology honestly, including the parts where he had made errors on the first attempt and had to revise his approach. He asked genuine questions about the pool management process and listened to the answers with the same attention he gave to anything technical and physical and real. By the end of the meal, Marak was addressing him directly rather than through Dura, which Dura later told him was the fastest she had ever seen her mother relent. They stayed the afternoon. Dura showed him the eastern pools themselves, walking the stone paths between the managed channels, explaining the sediment clearing and the vent pressure cycles, and the seasonal variations in mineral content that changed the water's properties in ways the valley people had charted over generations, but had never written down in a form that external buyers could verify, and thus monetize their ignorance of. "You should write it down," Jeremiah said, looking at the widest pool where the surface moved in slow circular patterns from the thermal upwelling below. "Not for them, for yourselves. A record that says we knew this and we knew it first." She looked at him. "You sound like my mother." "Your mother sounds like a sensible person." "Do not tell her that," Dura said. "It will only encourage her." In the late afternoon they sat on the stone ledge above the main pool, the one closest to the settlement where the warmth coming off the water was strong enough to make the air above it shimmer. The light on the valley at that hour was golden and hazy, filtered through the steam columns from a dozen seeps, and it turned everything soft and old. Dura sat close enough that their arms were touching along the ledge, and neither of them moved to create more space. "What happens now?" Jeremiah said. "For you, I mean. You have been working toward this commission meeting for months. What comes after it?" She considered this with the same directness she gave everything. "Stren will find another angle," she said. "He always does, so I watch and I build evidence, and when the next commission meeting comes I bring what I have." She paused. "It is a long work." And between meetings she was quiet for a moment. "I come home," she said. "I help with the pools. I take contracts where I can find them, guiding or carrying or whatever the road needs." Another pause. "It is a solitary life." He looked at the water. "I know something about that," he said. She looked at him. The late light was in her eyes, and they were extraordinary, those layered amber gold eyes, and she was looking at him with the kind of directness that only the most honest people sustained. No play in it, nothing withheld. "Jeremiah," she said, and the way she said his name was careful and deliberate, the way all her words were deliberate, like she had chosen it specifically from a set of alternatives. "What are your intentions after this?" He held her gaze. "My contract requires me to deliver the survey to the Ashenpool harbor master and receive payment. I have a debt to settle with a lumber merchant in Caldermore. And then I have nothing particular that requires me to be in Caldermore specifically." He paused. "If the survey I made is the official chart of record, the commission will need someone available for reevaluation when the thermal conditions shift, which you told me they do every season." "They do," she said carefully. "I could base my work out of Ashenpool," he said. "There is no licensed shipwright in the valley. There is harbor traffic that needs boats maintained, and boats need making, and the commission could presumably use someone with an ongoing relationship to the Channel survey. He kept his voice even and practical, though nothing about what he felt was either even or practical. "That is what I am thinking in practical terms." She watched him for a long moment, and in terms that are not practical, she said quietly. He turned to face her fully, which meant the few inches between them became a different kind of distance, one that was not about space at all. "In terms that are not practical," he said, "I have thought about you for 6 years, and I would very much like to stop thinking and start doing." She looked at him for one held breath, and then she reached up and put her hand against his jaw, the way she had held the map, firm and deliberate and not tentative in the least. She was warm, and she smelled of mineral water and wood smoke and leather, and the calluses on her hand were the calluses of someone who worked hard at things that mattered, and he thought he had never in his life wanted anything the way he wanted to close the remaining distance. So he did. She kissed him back with the same quality she brought to everything: complete attention, no half measures, fully committed. And it was the kind of first kiss that made the previous 6 years feel less like lost time and more like necessary distance. Like you had to get far enough away to properly see the direction home. When they separated, she kept her hand against his jaw for a moment, amber eyes near and warm and very clear. "6 years is a long time to wait," she said. "I would have come sooner if I had known," he said. "You know now," she said. The next morning was the settling of business, which in the life Jeremiah led was rarely separate from everything else. He went to the Ashenpool harbor master, who was Stren's appointment, but was also a man who understood that the commission vote had created a new operational reality, and formally delivered the survey and received his payment, which was enough to clear the lumber merchant's debt with a margin remaining. He sent the payment back to Caldermore with a reliable courier he had known for years, accompanied by a brief note that closed the account. Then he walked back through the valley to the eastern settlement, where Dura was helping with the morning pool work, standing knee-deep in the near pool with her leggings rolled to the thigh and a long-handled clearing tool. And he stood on the bank and watched her work for a while, and she glanced at him with a raised brow that said she knew he was standing there. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. "Then get in the water and make yourself useful," she said. "There is another clearing tool by the gate." He got in the water. It was warm, genuinely warm, like bath water that the earth had been heating since before the town existed, and it closed around his legs, and the mineral content of it was immediately evident, that specific silky quality that the hot spring water had. He waded to where she indicated and began working the channel clear, and for the next 2 hours he did pool maintenance with the Eastern Settlement's workers, which was repetitive and physical and entirely satisfying in the way that physical work on a real problem always was. Marek watched him from the pool bank for 20 minutes at one point. She did not say anything. She just watched and then went back to her own work. And later, when Jeremiah came up from the pool to eat the midday meal, she handed him a bowl without comment, which he understood was its own variety of communication. He also understood, because he was paying attention to the right things, that Dura watched her mother hand him the bowl, and that what moved across Dura's face in that moment was something close to relief, as though a verdict had been rendered that she had not been certain of, and had cared about more than she had let herself admit. He was a decent man, and he was paying attention, and being paid attention to by a person who was looking for the real thing rather than the surface was different from any other kind of being seen. It straightened something in him that had been slightly crooked for years. The trouble that Stren could not accomplish through the commission, Stren attempted through other means, and it came 3 days after the vote when word arrived at the Eastern Settlement by Ryder that an Orc woman matching Dura's description had been arrested in Ashenpool on a charge of treaty document fraud. The charge was entirely fabricated. The treaty documentation Dura carried was as legitimate as anything Stren had on his office walls, but Stren had appointed the Ashenpool town constable 6 months ago, and the constable had obligingly issued the warrant. The writer who brought the news was a young human man from the valley town who had no love for Stren's administration and had come as a courtesy, and the urgency in his face when he arrived made the entire settlement go very still. "The constable has sent men to the road," he said. "They will be here by afternoon." Dura looked at the writer, then at her mother, then at Jeremiah. Her face was controlled, but her jaw was set in a way he recognized as held fury, not fear, but the anger of someone who has spent years watching legal processes weaponized and is watching it happen again. "I will go," she said. "I will not have my mother's settlement searched." "You will not go to Stren Constable on a false charge," her mother said flatly. "That is how you disappear into a holding cell while he builds the next thing." "She is right," Jeremiah said. Both women looked at him. "A false charge that reaches the commission is a problem for Stren, not for you. A false charge that puts you in a cell before the commission hears about it is a different thing entirely." "They will arrest you on the road if you run," Dura said. "I am not running," he said. "I am going to Ashenpool now before the constable's men arrive here, and I am going to file a formal complaint with Commissioner Warren about the issuance of a warrant against a recognized treaty document holder. Warren has jurisdiction. The constable does not outrank a sitting commission chair." He paused. "But it has to happen before they take her. Once she is in a cell, the process is slower and Stren has time to manufacture more paperwork." Marek looked at him for a long moment. "You know commission law," she said. "I know enough of it," he said. "I have been dealing with harbor commissions for 10 years. Marek looked at Dura. Something passed between them that did not require words. "Go," Marek said to him. "Fast." He rode hard back to Ashenpool, and what he arrived to was worse than he had anticipated. The constable's men had moved quickly. Possibly the writer had not been the first to leave with news, and they were already in the square with 2 of Stren's aides, and they had already found Dura, who had apparently ridden to Ashenpool on her own with the same idea Jeremiah had, and had arrived 20 minutes ahead of him, and walked directly into the constable's men in the open square. She was standing at the center of the market square with her hands unbound, because she had not resisted arrest, and had made it clear she was not going to, which gave the constable's men no technical cause to chain her, but had not stopped them from positioning themselves in a loose ring around her that made the practical situation clear. There was a crowd of about 40 people in the square market day, which was the worst or best possible time, depending on what happened next. She caught his eye across the square immediately, and something in her expression shifted from coiled control to something more complicated. He was moving before he had finished thinking. He pushed through to the inner edge of the ring, which the constable's men did not immediately stop because he was human and suited and moving with purpose, and he said loudly enough for the square to hear, "Commissioner Warren needs to be present for any arrest under treaty jurisdiction." "Where is Commissioner Warren?" The nearest constable said. "This is not a treaty matter. This is a criminal charge." "It is a charge against a document holder under the Treaty of Ashrock," Jeremiah said, matching volume, "which makes it automatically a treaty matter under commission review, and I am hereby formally requesting that arrest proceedings halt until Commissioner Warren has reviewed the charging documents." He turned to the crowd, because the crowd was the point. "Does anyone here know Commissioner Warren's current location?" The leather merchant who had spoken at the commission meeting was in the crowd. He was a valley man, practical and fair. He said, "He is at the commission hall. I will get him." The constable's lead man, a solid, flat-eyed person named Braid who wore his authority like a garment he'd bought too tight, put his hand on Jeremiah's arm. "You are interfering with a lawful arrest," he said. "I am requesting commission oversight of a treaty-related detention," Jeremiah said, "which I am legally entitled to do as a commission-contracted surveyor. Remove your hand." Braid did not remove his hand. He tightened it. "You have 1 minute," he said quietly, "to step back." The crowd was very still. 40 people in a market square with the steam rising from the pools and the mineral smell in the warm air, and the morning light laid flat and bright across the stone. And in the center of the constable's ring Dura, Gorehorn stood with her arms at her sides and her chin up, looking neither afraid nor compliant, looking like a woman who had decided exactly what she was, and no assembled force was going to tell her otherwise. Jeremiah looked at Braid's hand on his arm. He looked at Dura. Then he walked past Braid into the ring, took Dura's arm and said, "Come with me." Braid moved. Two of his men moved, and the crowd moved. Not violently. It was not that kind of moment, and Jeremiah had not wanted it to be. But the leather merchant was not alone in his sympathies. And the valley people, the actual residents of Ashenpool who had been watching Stren's administration for months, had reached a specific threshold that market mornings in tight communities sometimes reached when something that has been building finally becomes visible. 3 men stepped between Braid and Jeremiah. A woman from the poolkeeper consortium moved to Dura's other side. There was a brief, loud argument in the middle of the square between Braid and 2 valley men that got close to physical and did not quite get there. Commissioner Warren arrived in the square before it could tip, the leather merchant at his elbow, and Warren's presence had the particular effect of a cold bucket, not because he was frightening, but because he was legitimate, and legitimacy in that moment was the thing that fear and anger both deferred to. He reviewed the charging documents in the middle of the square, standing in the sunlight with 40 people watching and Braid at his elbow making jurisdictional arguments that Warren heard with complete attention and then set aside with 2 sentences. The warrant was suspended pending commission review. The constable's men stood down. Braid looked at Jeremiah with an expression that promised future conversation, and Jeremiah held it without flinching. Dura was standing at his left. Her hand found his, and her grip was the same as it had been at the water trough, firm and deliberate and not tentative, and she did not let go. "Thank you," she said, low enough for only him. "I believe I owe you a chase through some alleys," he said. Her laugh was quiet and short and real. The suspension of the warrant was the beginning of the end for Stren's Ashenpool strategy, because Warren elevated the entire matter to the Border Governor's Council in Caldermore, not Stren's local authority, but the full Border Council which Stren was technically answerable to, and the fraudulent warrant alongside the rejected Customs Station proposal made a picture that the Council found uncomfortable enough to act on. An investigation was opened. Not a quick one, and not one guaranteed to conclude favorably, but the opening of it changed the calculus of everything Stren could do locally, because men under investigation moved more carefully. This took 2 weeks to develop, and Jeremiah was present for most of it, because he was the commission-contracted surveyor who had to remain available for follow-up questions, and because Ashenpool was where he was going to base his work, and because he had started building a boat. There was a small workshop near the valley's main docks that had been used by the previous commission boat builder, who had retired and moved to the lowlands, and the commission had been looking for someone to take it over for 2 seasons. Jeremiah looked at the space, which had good bones and good light and a timber stock that was damp but not ruined, and made an offer on the lease that was accepted within a day. He had work immediately. 3 poolkeepers' skiffs that needed new planking, a commission ferry that had been operating on a cracked keel for an embarrassingly long time, and a contract from the Eastern Settlement for a new water barge that would allow them to transport bottled mineral water to the valley market without having to hire lowland carriers. He worked with the focus and the depth of concentration that came from having exactly the right work in exactly the right place, and the workshop smell of shavings and linseed oil and pitch was the smell of being correctly located in the world. Dura came to the workshop in the evenings. She would appear at the open door with food from the settlement or from the market stalls, and they would eat in the workshop or take the food to the pool ledge above the Eastern Settlement, and the evenings unspooled between them with the ease of people who have known each other a long time in some essential way, even if the accumulated calendar time of knowing was still short. She helped him select timber from the valley's suppliers, because she knew who cut good wood and who sold half-seasoned stock with a persuasive patter, and her knowledge of the valley's material economy was a genuine asset in a place he was new to. He helped her with the documents she was preparing for the Border Council investigation, not the legal argument which Warren was handling, but the organizational structure of 6 months of evidence that needed to be comprehensible to people who had no direct knowledge of the valley situation. He had a draftsman's mind for spatial organization, and she had the content. And together, they produced something cleaner and more compelling than either could have made separately. They worked well together. It was the most unambiguous thing in the world. The nights when she stayed, and she stayed more often as the weeks went by, the settlement a long walk and the workshop close and warm, and there was an honesty between them that had no room for pretense, were the particular kind of nights that become the ones you carry. When the fire in the workshop's pot stove had settled to coals, and the valley outside was silent except for the deep, low sound of the thermal vents far below, and she was close and warm and real against him, and he was not alone in the way he had been alone for a long time, and it was not dramatic in those moments, just true. Just the specific sensation of someone who has been cold for years finally sitting in direct sunlight and thinking, "This is what warm is." He said this to her once, not very eloquently, reaching for the right words in the low firelight. She listened with her head against his shoulder and her eyes open, and she was quiet for a moment after he finished. "I have been waiting," she said. "For a long time, I have been waiting for something to feel like it was also mine. Not something I was managing or protecting or fighting for, just mine." She was quiet again. "You feel like that." He turned his head and pressed his lips to her hair. "I am that," he said, "if you want me to be." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "I stole your map," she said. "And then you caught me," he said. She lifted her head and looked at him. In the firelight her face was extraordinary, open and direct and entirely herself, and she looked at him the way she had on the pool ledge and again in the square, the way that meant she had chosen and was choosing still. "I caught you," she agreed. The Border Council's investigation into Stren's conduct concluded 6 weeks later with a formal censure, and the removal of his appointed harbor master from the Ashenpool post. Stren himself retained his governorship councils like that rarely fully surrendered power over their own, but the scope of his operational authority in the valley was significantly curtailed, and Commissioner Warren secured a formal addendum to the Treaty of Ashrock that explicitly protected the thermal vent array from any future infrastructure development. It was filed in the council records, and a copy went to the Eastern Settlement, where Marek Gorhorn rolled it out on her long table and read every word, and then rolled it back with the expression of someone who has been given one square meal after a long hunger. She did not say much to Jeremiah about it. She handed him a bowl at the next meal, and this time her hand briefly covered his on the bowl before she let it go, which he understood and accepted as the thing it was, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement from a woman who did not give either cheaply. Dura saw this exchange and looked away toward the window, and when she looked back her face was steady and warm and certain. Jeremiah had been in Ashenpool 3 months when the Commission ferry was seaworthy again, full new keel, recalked hull, repainted in the Commission's red and gray. And he took it out for the first trial run with Dura as crew, because she knew the channel, and because it was her valley, and because the chance to be on the water together with no particular emergency was one they had not yet had. The channel run was smooth, and the ferry responded well, and the weather was the best the valley got. The steam columns lifting straight in the still air and the water in the approach the cold dark blue of deep mineral content. And Dura stood at the bow with her braid loose in the channel wind and her eyes on the water, and Jeremiah watched her, and thought about the survey he had made of this water alone in a skiff, and could not imagine now that version of events continuing. He could not imagine having come here alone, done the work, taken the payment, gone back to Caldermore. She turned from the bow and came back to stand beside him at the steering oar. She looked at the channel ahead and then at him. "It is a good boat," she said. "It is a good commission," he said. She smiled. "You mean the ferry?" "I mean all of it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The channel water was dark and still below the hull, and the volcanic ridge was on their left and the valley opened on the right, and it was real and present and entirely theirs. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "My mother's settlement has a threshold ceremony," she said. "When two people decide to build something together, they cross the threshold of the home together and say what they mean in front of the people who matter." She paused. "Not a legal ceremony. Not an official commission record, just a threshold and words and the people who matter." Another pause. "I am asking if you would cross it with me." He looked at her. The wind moved her braid. The boat moved under them. "When," he said. "When you are ready," she said. "I was ready in the alley," he said. She laughed, and it was the alley laugh, the first one, full and real and completely unguarded, and she put her arm around him on the steering oar, and he put his arm around her waist, and the ferry moved on down the channel with the two of them together at the helm. The threshold ceremony of the Gorhorn people was not elaborate. It did not need to be. Marek had explained it to him quietly the evening before, sitting on the stone bench outside the settlement's main building with the valley going dark around them and the first stars coming through the sulfur haze. Two people stood on one side of the main building's door. They said what they had come to say. They crossed the threshold together. The household and the community were witness. That was the whole of it. What they said was their own. The morning of it was clear and warm. The kind of valley morning that felt like the world had been washed overnight, every thermal pool catching the early light and the steam columns rising straight and white. The Eastern Settlement's members had assembled in the yard in front of the main building, a small gathering, a dozen adults and the two younger members of the community who were old enough to understand the ceremony and young enough to still feel the full weight of witness. Marek stood to one side of the door, not officiating but present, which was the role she had held at every threshold ceremony since she had become the settlement's elder. Jeremiah and Dura stood on the step below the door with the valley at their backs, and the whole morning light falling across the building face, and the people arrayed in the yard. She had redone her braid, and it was elaborate this morning. The thick dark fall of it worked with small copper beads that were a traditional element. And she wore her fitted travel vest over the ochre shirt the way she had worn it since the first day, and she was exactly herself, entirely herself, not dressed as anything except what she was. He had put on his better coat, which was not very different from his worse coat but was cleaner and had all its buttons. He was aware of the smallness of the gathering and was grateful for it. The right size, exactly the right size for what this was. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I came to Caldermore for a map," she said. Her voice was low and carried in the still morning air. "I came to Caldermore for a contract and a strategy, and a piece of information I needed for a fight I have been fighting for a long time. I did not come for you." She paused. "But I remembered you. For 6 years I remembered the man who would not leave a sinking skiff and would not take payment for help, and rode a roan gelding into a volcanic valley for a woman he barely knew because the work mattered." She looked at him steadily. "I stole your map. I said you could have it back when you caught me. You caught me. You have had the map for months." A pause and the trace of a smile. "You never left." He held her gaze. When he spoke his voice was steady because he meant every word. "I have been a person who kept his head down," he said. "I built boats and did the work and did not ask much else of the world because the world had not given me reason to ask. And then a woman stole something I had spent 18 months building, and I chased her through every back alley in Caldermore, and she turned around at the end of a road and smiled at me." He paused. "I have been following that smile ever since, and I am not going to stop." He reached out and took her hand, the same hand that had covered his on the map, the same hand that had rested against his jaw on the pool ledge, the same deliberate, firm, warm hand. "I'm not a man of great position or great wealth. I'm a shipwright and a dockhand and a surveyor when the work calls for it. I am going to build boats in your valley for as long as you will have me here. I am going to stand in front of every braid and every stren and every road check that comes for you, and I am not going to step back, because you are worth more than anything I have ever been asked to keep, and I intend to keep you." The yard was very quiet. Dura's amber eyes were bright and direct, and she was not smiling now, but the quality of her face was the warmest thing he had ever seen. "Cross with me," she said. They turned together to the door, and Marek opened it from inside, standing back, and the threshold was dark and warm and smelled of mineral water and wood smoke, and the life that was already half built inside it. They crossed it together, her hand in his shoulder against hers, and behind them the yard let out a sound that was not quite a cheer and not quite a breath, but something that communicated the specific human and orc and universal satisfaction of watching two people find the right thing. He kissed her in the doorway, one hand cupping her face, the copper beads in her braid cool against his knuckles, her hands gripping the front of his coat the way she gripped everything, firmly, without hesitation, entirely committed. The kiss was warm and long and carried in it everything that the past 3 months had been building toward, and everything the next stretch of time was going to be. And when they separated, they were both slightly breathless, and she was smiling in a way that he intended to spend the rest of his life being the cause of. Marek handed them each a bowl. This time she did not let go of either one until she had looked at Jeremiah for a long moment with those same amber gold eyes that her daughter had, and then she nodded, a single precise nod that said more than a speech would have. "Welcome to the threshold, shipwright," she said. "Thank you," he said, "for the bowl and for the rest." She gave him the look that suggested she knew exactly what she was worth and was satisfied the point had been made. Then she turned back to the room, and the morning proceeded. The commissioned ferry made its first official run of the season 2 weeks later, Jeremiah at the helm and Dura standing at the bow where she had stood on the trial run. But this time, they carried a dozen passengers, valley traders and pool keepers, and one of the commission's neutral assessors, a younger man from the northern settlements who was conducting a routine resource evaluation and had heard of the valley's pools with academic interest and wanted to see them firsthand. The assessor spent most of the journey asking Dura questions about the pool management process, and she answered with the same patient thoroughness she brought to everything. And at the end of the run, when they were tying off at the valley dock, the assessor said to Jeremiah, "Your partner knows more about this valley's thermal systems than anyone I have read on the subject." "She does," Jeremiah said. He tied the stern line with a practiced motion and looked up at where Dura was helping the passengers step off at the dock with that easy, unhurried competence, pointing out the path to the market square, answering one more question from the assessor's associate, doing 3 things at once without visible effort. "You should get her to write it down," the assessor said. "I have been telling her that," Jeremiah said. She looked over at that moment, heard just enough of the tone to know he was talking about her, and gave him the raised brow that was her particular shorthand for "What are you saying about me?" And he grinned at her, and she looked away, but he caught the corner of her mouth turning up before she managed to suppress it. That evening they sat on the pool ledge again, the same ledge above the eastern pools where he had told her what he wanted in terms that were not practical, where she had kissed him for the first time with the Golden Valley light around them. The water below moved in its slow thermal circles. The steam columns were white against the cooling sky. She was writing. She had been writing since the assessor's comment had apparently landed at the right angle, producing a small leather-bound journal from her vest pocket, and beginning to set down the pool management records that existed only in her head and in her mother's head, and in the heads of the people who had maintained these pools for 3 generations. Her handwriting was precise and angular, and she wrote quickly when she wrote, words accumulating on the pages with the same purposeful efficiency that characterized everything she did. He was watching her write and thinking about the alley and the map and the 6 years between the skiff and the ridge path, and the particular grace of arriving at the right place at the right time after having been at the wrong places at the wrong times for long enough to know the difference. "You are staring," she said without looking up. "I am looking," he said. "There is a distinction. Staring is what you do at things that confuse you," he said. "Looking is what you do at things you want to understand." She stopped writing and looked at him. The amber eyes were warm and direct and absolutely certain. "And what have you concluded?" she said. He thought about it honestly for a moment. The valley around them and the pools below, and the settlement at their backs and the work in the workshop, and the ferry on the channel and the man he was, which was an ordinary man, a decent man, a man who had worked hard and kept his head down and been lonely in a moderate, functional, not quite noticed way for years until a woman stole his map and laughed at him from an alley wall. "That I got here just in time," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she closed the journal, reached across the ledge and took his hand. Firm and deliberate and completely sure, the way she did everything. The valley breathed around them in its ancient thermal rhythm, steam and stone and warm water, and the particular piece of a place that has been fought for and held. And the evening light settled over the pools and the settlement and the two of them on the ledge. And the world was exactly what it was supposed to be.